level of violence that now exists. It is to save the lives of brave men and innocent women and children. It is to permit the contending forces to move closer to a political settlement. Tonight, I call upon the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union as co-chairmen of the Geneva Conferences and as permanent members of the United Nations Security Council to do all they can to move from the unilateral act of de-escalation I have just announced toward genuine peace in Southeast Asia. The United States now, as in the past, is ready to send its representatives to any forum at any time to discuss the means of bringing this war to an end. Let's have Walt outline the 3 or 4 steps we want to ask these folks to do, the United Kingdom. Do they call a Geneva conference? Do they take it up in the Security Council specifically? You see what I mean? Not on this script, but later for that conference I have, 5 o'clock. One of our most distinguished Americans, Ambassador Averell Harriman, is my personal representative for such talks. In addition, I have asked Ambassador Llewellyn Thompson, who is returning from Moscow for consultation, to be available to join cut out this A here. Gosh, I don't know who would do something like this. Looks like they'd see it when they're typing it. To join Ambassador Harriman at Geneva or any other suitable place. You get that? Gentlemen? Did you all get that A in there? Just as soon as Hanoi agrees to a conference. I call upon President Ho Chi Minh to respond positively and favorably to this new step toward peace. It may be that Hanoi, having embarked on a major offensive, will not now enter into serious negotiation until South Vietnam and its allies demonstrate that the communists cannot this spring or later destroy our will and our fighting power. I would consider eliminating that, Jim, because of our offensive too, you see, now, at this point. You follow me? Ask Walt about that if that shouldn't. If peace does not come through negotiations, it will come when Hanoi understand that our common resolve is unshakable and our common strength is invincible. Tonight, we and other allied nations are contributing 600,000 fighting men to assist 700,000 South Vietnamese troops in defending their country. In 1961, we provided limited military forces to help South Vietnam meet a subversion, guided and supported from the north. Beginning in 1965, we committed ground forces as a direct response to the invasion of South Vietnam with the regular forces of North Vietnam that had begun in the previous year. Yet our presence there has always rested on this basic belief. The main burden of preserving their freedom must be carried with the South Vietnamese themselves. We and our allies can only help to provide a shield behind which the people of South Vietnam can survive and develop. Of their efforts, on their determination and resourcefulness, the outcome then will ultimately depend. That small beleaguered nation has suffered terrible punishment for more than 20 years. What is this red sign there? Does that turn the page? Well, they ought to put it where you can see it. I'll have the pages here, I guess. I pay tribute once again to the great courage and endurance of its people. South Vietnam supports army forces of almost 700,000 men today, the equivalent of more than 10 million in our own population. Its people maintain their firm determination to be free of domination by the North. There has been substantial progress in building a durable government during the past 3 years. The South Vietnam of 1965 could not have survived the enemy's Tet Offensive of 1968. The elected government of South Vietnam survived that attack and is rapidly repairing the devastation that it wrought. The South Vietnamese know that further efforts are required to expand their armed forces, to move back into the countryside, to increase their taxes, to select the very best men they have for post. What does that mean? Plural for posts?
Yes, positions.
They have for civil and military positions. Or for best they have for civil and military responsibility. Cut out post N. To achieve a new unity within their constitutional government and to include in the national effort all those groups who wish to preserve South Vietnam's control over its own destiny. Last week, President Chu ordered the mobilization of 135,000 additional South Vietnamese. He planned to reach as soon as possible total military strength of some 800,000 men. To achieve this, the government of South Vietnam started the drafting of 19-year-olds on March the 1st. On May the 1st, the government will begin drafting 18-year-olds. Last month, 10,000 men volunteered for military service, 2.5 times the number of volunteers during the same month last year. Since the middle of January, more than 48,000 South Vietnamese have joined the armed forces, nearly half of them volunteers. All men in the South Vietnamese armed forces have had their tours of service extended for the duration of the war, and reserves are now...
Wants to go. I'll make it very clear and precise which way we want to go in the Democratic Party. We want to go forward in the same way that Wilson went forward in his time, and Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman. We want a defense second to none. The Democrats every year since 1953 in the Congress have made an attempt to secure the appropriation of more funds to provide for the national defense. Unless the United States is second to none, then this country's survival is in danger, and so is the cause of freedom around the world. We want a country moving ahead here at home. Last year, the Soviet Union exceeded the economic growth of this country by 3 times. Last year, we had the lowest rate of economic growth of any major industrialized society in the world. We've got 1.5 million people coming into the market every year seeking jobs. Unless this country moves ahead, unless we continue to grow, unless our defenses are strong, unless we're educating our children, unless we are showing in every way, in science, in space, and here in Texas, that this country is first. Not first but or when or if, but first. And that's what the Democratic Party wants to do in 1960. We ask your help in this campaign. I come today with a Texan and a son of Massachusetts running on the ticket of the oldest party, but in a sense the youngest party. We ask your help in this campaign. Thank you.
Hello, folks. Are you feeling good this morning? Hope you do. I'm trying to get on my feet again. Feel pretty good. Thankful it's as well as it is. Oh, boys, I'm pleased to see you. I don't know where you come from, but I give you all the welcome I've got to offer you. And I want to tell you that I'm living on the same ground that I've lived on for 75 long years when I come here as an 18-year-old bride. I went to Washington 50 years and a little more ago. I saw all the people around there and been with the president. And I learned a great many things up there that I didn't know before. I'll add a little more to it. I was one of the board of lady managers for the Chicago Exposition. And I served my full time in Chicago and learned a good many things over there. I was a delegate to the Tennessee Centennial Exposition. I was a delegate to St. Louis, a juror at St. Louis. I think for a North Georgia cracker of my size and age, I've had a pretty good education on that line. That do all right? I was a 3-year-old girl when the Indians were moved from this country to Indian Territory. I have an indistinct recollection of seeing the red men as they went through the woods, for everything was woods nearly at that time. I have a distinct impression, if a 3-year-old child can have it. Nevertheless, I've been here since that time, and I've seen the march of progress all the way. At that time, we had only stagecoaches, and we only had horses and buggies, and we had lots of footback travelers. Now I've seen it come along all this way, and the airplane goes over my house going on its way, and it's got to be such a common thing, the old girl don't go even out to see if she can look at it.
Shared a mutual hatred. This might be obvious enough by the nicknames each had for the other. Kennedy called Johnson Uncle Rufus, or Rufus Cornpone, in reference to his crude speech, lumbering posture, and lack of class. Johnson called Kennedy a grandstanding runt and a snot-nosed kid. For the good of the Democratic Party, they kept the drama behind the scenes. But to anyone around them, it was no secret. Kennedy was even gifted a voodoo doll of Johnson, which he happily stabbed with pins. At face value, it might be easy to blame it on the dynamic. Johnson had been Senate Majority Leader, called the second most powerful man in the country in the days of Eisenhower, and now he was Vice President, a notoriously useless role. Meanwhile, Robert Kennedy, who was nearly 2 decades younger, was Attorney General and the President's closest advisor, seemingly for no good reason other than he was the President's brother. But the hatred started much further back. It might have even started all the way back in 1940. Late that year, President Franklin D. Roosevelt fired Ambassador Joe Kennedy, Robert's father. 32-year-old Congressman Johnson was with Roosevelt when he made the decision to fire, quote, that son of a bitch. Robert Kennedy was only 15 at the time, but he no doubt heard the story passed around as Johnson loved retelling it. For Kennedy, it was a humiliating blow to the father he admired. For Johnson, it was a funny story of a rich snob getting his comeuppance. It earned Johnson hatred from young Kennedy, and as Joe said of his own son, once Bobby hates you, you stayed hated. 13 years later, in 1953, they met for the first time in the Senate cafeteria. Young Kennedy was just working as an assistant to Senator Joseph McCarthy. Well entrenched in his political career, Johnson had already been a Texas senator for 4 years and had just been elected Senate Minority Leader earlier that month. Biographer Robert Caro describes the scene. As Johnson, Bubsy, and Reedy walked by, McCarthy, as was his custom, jumped up to shake Johnson's hand, calling him, as senators were already starting to do, leader, and McCarthy's staffers also rose, except, quite conspicuously, for Bobby, who sat unmoving, with a look on the face that Bubsy described as a sort of glower. Lyndon Johnson knew how to handle that situation. Moving around the table, he extended his hand to McCarthy and those of the standing staffers, and, when he got to Bobby Kennedy, stood there, with his hand not exactly extended, but in Bubsy's words, sort of half-raised, looking down at Kennedy. For a long moment, Kennedy didn't move. The glower had deepened into something more. Bobby could really look hating, Bubsy says, and that was how he looked then. He didn't want to get up, but Johnson was kind of forcing him to. And finally, without looking Johnson in the eye, he stood up and shook his hand. When later asked what all the drama was about, Johnson simply said, "It's about Roosevelt and his father." He knew exactly why Kennedy hated him, but he probably never thought that a decade later he'd still be dealing with this thorn in his side. At the 1960 Democratic National Convention, John F. Kennedy won the nomination, and one of the defeated was Lyndon Johnson. To Johnson, this was ridiculous. He was the Senate Majority Leader and one of the most powerful and skilled politicians in Washington. Yet he lost to someone he considered to be a political lightweight. As Johnson saw it, 2 things got Kennedy as far as he was: Daddy's money and his public appeal, meaning good looks, charisma, good speaking ability, friendliness, and likability, all advantages which Johnson was well aware he never had. In no small part, Kennedy's triumph was due to Western delegates swinging away from Johnson, thanks to some politicking from Kennedy's brother Edward and his other brother, Robert. The Kennedys offered Johnson the role as running mate to balance the ticket. Johnson accepted, but wasn't happy. At 51, with over 2 decades in politics, he was playing second fiddle to some rich pretty boy. This might explain the general animosity between the Kennedys and Johnson, but it doesn't explain the exceptional animosity between LBJ and RFK. In looking for an explanation, anecdote upon